You've been told that your thoughts are powerful. You've heard people say things like, thoughts become things, or you create your own reality. But what if that wasn't just philosophy or pop psychology? What if it was a scientifically grounded truth backed by one of the most precise and successful frameworks in physics, quantum field theory? This video will change the way you think about reality. Not metaphorically, literally. We're stepping beyond vague affirmations and speculative spiritual ideas. This is not about positive thinking or manifestation rituals. This is about the deep structure of reality and how your consciousness might play a fundamental role in shaping the physical world around you. Quantum field theory, QFT, isn't some fringe idea. It's the cornerstone of modern physics. It's the framework that gave us the Standard Model, explained the Higgs boson, and governs the behavior of all known particles. But what happens when we stop thinking of QFT as just a physics toolkit and start looking at it as a window into consciousness? In this video, you're going to discover a radically new interpretation of how the universe works. Not from a spiritual guru or a motivational speaker, but from theoretical physics itself. We'll take you beyond the well-known double-slit experiment and introduce you to the next generation of the observer effect, one that emerges naturally from QFT. You'll learn how the quantum vacuum isn't empty at all but brimming with potential, and how consciousness might be the key that collapses that potential into reality. You'll explore the concept of consciousness not as a byproduct of the brain, but as a field in its own right, possibly on equal footing with the electromagnetic or gravitational fields. We'll look at how observation doesn't just detect reality, it actively selects it. And this isn't just theory. You'll see experimental data, some mainstream, some controversial, that continues to defy classical interpretations. Studies that show outcomes aligning with conscious intent. Patterns that seem to suggest reality isn't fully real until it's observed. And yes, science is still grappling with the implications. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the most brilliant minds in physics, from John Wheeler to David Bohm, hinted at a participatory cosmos, one in which you are not a passive observer but an active contributor. This isn't science fiction. This is quantum field theory, reimagined. And it might just prove that your consciousness creates reality. The double-slit experiment has become the poster child of quantum weirdness. A single particle passing through two slits behaves like a wave, interfering with itself until it's observed. Then, somehow, it decides to act like a particle. The moment an observer is introduced, the behavior of the system changes. For decades, this has raised one uncomfortable question. What is it about observation that collapses a probability wave into a definite state? Quantum field theory takes this a step further, offering a richer and more nuanced framework that moves beyond individual particles and into the realm of fields. In QFT, particles are not fundamental. They are excitations, localized vibrations in underlying quantum fields. Electrons, photons, quarks, all of them are merely ripples in invisible, omnipresent fields stretching across the universe. So when something is observed, it isn't just a particle being located in space. It's an interaction between fields. The question then becomes, what role does the conscious observer play in that interaction? In QFT, the vacuum state, the so-called empty space, isn't empty at all. It's a bubbling sea of fluctuating energy, constantly generating virtual particles that pop in and out of existence. These fluctuations are not just theoretical, they have measurable effects. The Casimir effect, for instance, is a physical force that arises purely from vacuum fluctuations between two plates. The implications are staggering. The universe is constantly in motion, constantly pregnant with potential, even when no thing is present. And here's where the observer effect gets reimagined. In traditional quantum mechanics, measurement causes a wave function to collapse into a definite state. But in QFT, what is measured is a field excitation, and what is being collapsed isn't a particle state but a configuration of the field. This adds a new layer of complexity. Consciousness, then, might not merely be affecting a single event or particle, It could be interfacing with the entire field structure of reality. Now, consider this. If the vacuum is full of unrealized possibilities, and observation selects which of those possibilities manifest, what determines the choice? This is where the idea of consciousness as a causal agent becomes difficult to ignore. If consciousness interfaces with the field, then the act of observing may not just be passive detection. It may be a form of selection from among infinite potential outcomes. Several modern experiments suggest exactly that. For instance, some studies in quantum optics show that entangled particles can exhibit correlations that seem to depend not just on their physical interactions but on whether or not a conscious observer is involved. In one controversial study, random number generators influenced by human intention produced statistically significant deviations from expected randomness, suggesting that intention itself might be able to interact with quantum systems. These outcomes defy classical explanations. They don't fit into the standard cause and effect mold. The only consistent feature across these studies is the presence of a conscious system. So how might this actually work? In QFT, each field has a set of allowable modes, ways in which it can vibrate. Observing a system can be thought of as reducing the infinite set of possibilities to a single vibration, a single mode. The field chooses a configuration, and that configuration becomes the observed reality. Consciousness under this framework might be acting as a constraint, a kind of tuning fork that selects one mode over another. This brings us to a fundamental philosophical shift. Reality is not a fixed object waiting to be discovered. It is a probabilistic tapestry, shaped into form by the act of conscious observation. The observer is not looking at reality from the outside, they are entangled with it. This view aligns with interpretations like quantum Bayesianism or Cubism, which treats the wave function not as an objective entity, but as a representation of an observer's knowledge or belief. In that framework, measurement doesn't reveal a pre-existing property. It creates the property through interaction. QFT gives this even more grounding. It doesn't require spooky action at a distance or parallel universes. It simply redefines reality as the configuration of vibrating fields, selected and collapsed by interaction. Consciousness might be the ultimate interface, not only perceiving these fields but influencing their collapse. Let's revisit the quantum vacuum. It's often described as a zero-point field, where energy fluctuations are never truly zero. The vacuum is the lowest energy state, but it's not devoid of activity. It's a canvas on which all reality is painted. If consciousness has a unique coupling to this vacuum field, then perhaps it operates as a sculptor, shaping raw potential into concrete form. This isn't just speculation. Quantum cosmologists have pointed out that even the Big Bang itself might have been a fluctuation in a quantum vacuum. If that's true, then all of spacetime emerged from a field of pure potential. And if observation can collapse that field locally, what's to stop consciousness from playing an even larger role? It's no wonder that John Wheeler, one of the giants of 20th century physics, proposed the concept of the participatory universe. In his view, the universe didn't fully exist until it was observed. Quantum field theory provides a mechanism for this. Fields don't become real objects until their states are fixed through interaction, and possibly through observation. We must also confront the implications of delayed choice experiments, where decisions made in the present appear to influence quantum outcomes in the past. If observation can reach backward in time, it suggests that reality itself is not a linear sequence of events but a mesh of potentialities collapsing in response to consciousness across time. This may seem counterintuitive, but it matches what QFT tells us. Time is not an absolute flow but a parameter in a field equation. If fields are timeless in nature, and if consciousness interacts with those fields, then what we perceive as now could be just one point of engagement within a much larger timeless field. In short, the observer effect doesn't stop at particles or detectors. It goes deeper. It reaches into the very foundation of reality, the fields themselves, and suggests that your consciousness, far from being a side effect of the brain, might be a field-level influence, constantly interacting, constantly selecting, and constantly creating reality as you experience it. In the next part, we'll explore what this means for consciousness itself. Could awareness be a quantum field in its own right? What happens when thought and field theory meet at the deepest level? We're only just beginning. Quantum field theory doesn't describe the universe as a collection of particles floating through space. It describes reality as a vast, continuous interplay of vibrating fields. Every particle you've ever heard of, electrons, photons, quarks, is just a localized ripple in one of these quantum fields. The fields themselves are the true building blocks. They exist everywhere, all the time, filling the void of space with unseen potential. But what if consciousness isn't the exception? What if, instead of emerging from matter, consciousness is another field, just as fundamental as the electromagnetic or gravitational field? Let's look at the core of what QFT says. There are no standalone things in this universe. There are only fields and their interactions. So, if we are going to speak meaningfully about something as persistent, dynamic, and non-local as consciousness, it makes more sense to consider it not as a static object or an emergent property, but as an active field woven into the quantum fabric itself. Take a step back and ask, what does a field do? It stretches across space and time. It fluctuates. It interacts. A photon isn't a particle moving from point A to point B. It's an excitation in the electromagnetic field. When you observe a photon, you're not catching a tiny marble. You're seeing the effect of a ripple reaching your point of interaction. Now apply that logic to thought. Consciousness fluctuates. It changes. It interacts. It doesn't have a specific location. It isn't confined to a place. And when it engages with reality, when it observes, it seems to create an outcome. All the characteristics that make a quantum field a field, consciousness has them too. Let's push this further. In QFT, every particle type has a corresponding field. The electron field gives rise to electrons. The gluon field gives rise to gluons. So if consciousness consistently generates observable effects, if it shapes outcomes, collapses possibilities, and projects subjective experience, why wouldn't it have a corresponding field as well? The idea of a consciousness field isn't just poetic, it may be necessary. If all forces and interactions in physics are mediated by fields, and if consciousness produces real effects in quantum systems, then denying its field-based nature makes it an anomaly in an otherwise consistent framework. In fact, some physicists have already started inching toward this idea without necessarily calling it a consciousness field. Consider the role of decoherence in quantum mechanics. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, its wave function seems to collapse into a definite state. But what defines that environment? What determines when decoherence happens? Decoherence is probabilistic and context-dependent. The boundaries between observer and system are blurry. And here's where consciousness re-enters the picture. If consciousness operates as a field, it wouldn't need to observe in the traditional sense. It would influence other fields through interference, resonance, or entanglement, just like any other quantum field. This is more than metaphor. QFT allows for field interactions that don't require direct contact, only coupling constants, energy thresholds, and modes of vibration. If the consciousness field exists, then thought, attention, and awareness could be seen as vibrational modes within that field, patterns that interact with the broader quantum environment. Let's bring in mathematics. In QFT, each field is governed by a Lagrangian, a mathematical function describing how the field behaves, propagates, and interacts. Fields can couple. They can mix. They can give rise to emergent phenomena. If consciousness is a field, then theoretically it too would have a Lagrangian. And its dynamics might involve coupling with other fields, such as the electromagnetic or gravitational fields. This opens up fascinating possibilities. Imagine thoughts as wave functions in a consciousness field, each with its own amplitude and frequency. High-energy thoughts might resonate more powerfully, while low-energy ones might barely register. If this field interacts with the quantum vacuum, it could select outcomes from among the infinite possibilities offered by that vacuum. The act of thinking wouldn't be passive, it would be creative. Some models in theoretical physics have tried to generalize quantum mechanics using higher-dimensional Hilbert spaces. These extended formulations offer room for variables that don't directly correspond to physical particles. A consciousness field might be represented in this way, an informational field influencing and being influenced by quantum states. And we already have experimental clues that point toward this. Studies using quantum noise generators have shown patterns that correspond to the presence of directed human attention. Random event generators influenced by focused intention produce statistical anomalies. These effects are often subtle, but their consistency challenges the notion that consciousness is isolated or causally inert. From a field-based perspective, such effects aren't surprising. They're exactly what you'd expect when one field modulates another. There's another implication here. If consciousness is a field, it doesn't belong solely to individuals. Fields extend through space. They are non-local. This would explain phenomena like collective consciousness, synchronicity, and even telepathic experiences. The consciousness field wouldn't be cut off at the boundary of the skull. It would be distributed, reaching beyond individual identity. Quantum entanglement supports this idea. When particles become entangled, they remain connected across arbitrary distances. Their states are not independent, even when separated by light years. If two conscious agents can be entangled through shared experience or mutual observation, their thoughts might resonate across the same field, explaining connections that defy classical explanation. This doesn't mean thoughts are magical. It means they are field interactions, governed by coherent dynamics. Just as two tuning forks can resonate when one is struck, minds might resonate when attuned to the same field configuration. This wouldn't violate physics. It would extend it. There's also a thermodynamic side to consider. The brain generates measurable electromagnetic fields. Neural oscillations, alpha, beta, gamma waves, are all forms of rhythmic energy. If these rhythms interact with an underlying consciousness field, the brain might serve as a transducer, not a generator of consciousness but a receiver and modulator. Much like a radio doesn't create the signal it plays, but tunes into a broader broadcast. That would flip neuroscience on its head. The brain isn't where consciousness resides. It's where consciousness focuses. It's the interface, not the origin. QFT also allows us to explore how consciousness might shape time. Unlike classical physics, quantum field theory treats time as a parameter that can be manipulated. Some advanced formulations involve imaginary time, loop variables, or non-commutative time operators. If the consciousness field exists outside traditional spacetime, or if it shapes time as part of its vibration, then conscious intent might ripple both forward and backward, selecting not only the what of reality but also the when. This may sound exotic, but it aligns with findings in retrocausality experiments, where choices made in the present appear to influence outcomes in the past. Consciousness, when treated as a field, might explain how such feedback loops occur. The field vibrates across time, just as it vibrates across space. It is not bound by linear sequences, but by coherence patterns. Finally, the consciousness field hypothesis reframes the question of self. Who are you in this model? Not a physical brain, not a set of memories. You are a standing wave in a field of conscious potential. Your thoughts, perceptions, decisions, they are all emergent expressions of how this field interacts with the quantum fields of matter and energy. And that leads to a powerful realization. If consciousness is a field, and if fields are fundamental to reality, then your consciousness is not secondary. It is not incidental. It is not an afterthought of the brain. It is a primary component of the cosmos, woven into the very laws that shape existence. The implications are massive. They challenge materialist assumptions. They demand a reinterpretation of physics. But most importantly, they open the door to a new understanding of what it means to be alive. Not as an observer of reality, but as a participant whose mind is not separate from the universe, but a mode of it. In the next part, we'll explore exactly that, how reality itself may be participatory at its core. What does it mean to say that reality responds to observation? And how does quantum field theory allow for a universe that doesn't just exist, but co-evolves with consciousness? We're stepping into the most radical territory yet. Quantum field theory has already dismantled our traditional notions of particles and forces. It has shown that the universe isn't made up of isolated bits of matter, but rather of dynamic, entangled fields vibrating across spacetime. But it doesn't stop there. What it also suggests, when followed to its logical conclusion, is that the very existence of reality may be influenced by observation. And this idea didn't emerge from mysticism or philosophy. It came from physicists themselves. John Archibald Wheeler, a pioneer of quantum gravity and one of the minds behind the Manhattan Project, proposed something extraordinary. The universe is participatory. In other words, it does not fully exist independently of observation. The act of measurement, of conscious engagement, is not just revealing reality, it is completing it. In Wheeler's terms, no phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. This idea is radical, but it's not unsupported. Let's start with the basic tools of QFT. In this framework, all particles are excitations of fields. They don't have fixed identities until they interact. Until then, they exist in a superposed state, a mathematical wave of probabilities, not a definite outcome. The moment they are observed, whether by an instrument, a detector, or potentially a conscious observer, these probabilities collapse into an actuality. In traditional quantum mechanics, this is already strange enough. But in QFT, these probabilities exist not just in abstract mathematical space, but as real physical fields permeating spacetime. The entire quantum vacuum is alive with virtual particles, fluctuating in and out of existence. It's not a void. It's a sea of potentiality, a canvas awaiting interaction. What collapses this canvas into form? What selects one possibility over another? It's the act of participation, measurement, observation, interaction. But observation is not a passive act. In the quantum context, it's an entangling act. Observer and system become intertwined. Their boundary dissolves. Here's the turning point. If the act of observation changes the outcome, then the observer is not external to reality. The observer is part of the system that makes consciousness not just matter or energy, a participant in the unfolding of the cosmos. Quantum field theory supports this through entanglement. When two particles interact, they become entangled, meaning their states are no longer independent. Change one, and the other responds even across light years. This isn't theoretical, it's been proven. So what happens when a conscious observer engages with a quantum system? The system becomes entangled with the observer. Not metaphorically, literally. The brain's neural patterns, the body's electrical responses, even the observer's mental state, all become part of the total quantum system. If QFT permits entanglement between particles, and if consciousness has any field-like properties, then consciousness too can become entangled with reality. This is what Wheeler meant when he said we are not simply passive viewers of the cosmic drama, we are actors in it. Reality is not something that happens to us. It's something that happens with us. Now let's expand this further. Wheeler's concept of the delayed choice experiment deepens the mystery. In these experiments, a decision made in the present appears to influence the behavior of particles in the past. A photon that passes through a double-slit setup will behave either like a wave or a particle depending on whether you choose to measure it after it has already passed the slits. In QFT terms, this suggests that the photon's behavior is not finalized until it interacts with an observer's measuring device, and perhaps with the observer's consciousness. That device and the act of observation are not simply logging what already happened. They are participating in what happens. This breaks every classical assumption we've held for centuries. Causality is not linear. Time is not absolute. And most importantly, observation doesn't reveal an independent world. It helps create one. This brings us to the deeper point. The relationship between matter and mind is not sequential. It is simultaneous and co-creative. Matter doesn't just generate consciousness. Consciousness shapes the manifestation of matter through a field of interaction that QFT is uniquely equipped to describe. In Wheeler's own words, the universe does not exist out there independent of all acts of observation. The universe is in some strange sense a participatory universe. But let's not get lost in theory. What does it actually mean for the physical world? It means that the reality you experience is not purely objective. It is, at least in part, selected not necessarily in a conscious, deliberate way, but through the constant act of interacting with it. Every choice, every observation, every moment of focused awareness is a participatory act. You're not looking at reality. You're in conversation with it. Let's return to the quantum vacuum. In QFT, the vacuum is not empty. It's the most energetic state in existence, filled with quantum fluctuations. Virtual particles pop in and out of existence constantly. If you zoomed in deep enough, you would see a boiling storm of activity, even in a perfect vacuum. What determines which of these fluctuations become actual particles? What governs which ones become part of our physical world? Interaction, measurement, observation. Now suppose consciousness has its own field. When it interacts with the quantum vacuum, it could act as a selection mechanism, collapsing potentiality into actuality, not randomly, but with a kind of coherence or preference aligned to the state of the consciousness field itself. This is not mysticism. This is a natural extension of what QFT already tells us, that reality at its deepest level is not fixed. It is a field of potentialities, waiting to be shaped by participation. Here's a deeper twist. QFT teaches us that even space and time are not absolute backgrounds. They are shaped by the energy and fields within them. If consciousness interacts with these fields, then it could, at least in theory, influence space and time themselves. In a participatory universe, space-time is not a stage. It is a co-evolving medium, and consciousness is not confined to watching from the sidelines. It is part of the creative process. This could explain why time seems to bend under intense mental focus, why intention appears to influence outcomes, why coherent attention seems to affect even random quantum systems. If the observer and the observed are not separate, but coupled through entangled fields, then each moment of awareness becomes an act of creation. This vision is not just philosophical, it's testable. Researchers are exploring whether coherent states of consciousness produce observable changes in quantum systems. Early data from experiments on random number generators, quantum tunneling rates, and photon interference patterns suggest that observation by conscious agents can tilt probabilities, subtly but consistently. These effects defy classical explanation, but in a QFT-based participatory model, they make sense. Consciousness doesn't control reality, it collaborates with it. Let's bring back the idea of the participatory universe one last time. Imagine reality not as a finished structure, but as an evolving script. Every observer is not just reading it, they're writing it as they go. Every thought, every act of attention becomes a sentence in the unfolding narrative of existence. This changes everything. It means that objectivity is not the absence of participation. It is the sum total of participatory acts from all observers across the cosmos. Reality is the averaged-out result of trillions of acts of co-creation. It means that your subjective experience is not separate from science. It is part of the experiment. Your mind is not an illusion. It is one of the tools the universe uses to know itself. And it means that physics is not about discovering a reality that exists independently of us. It is about understanding the rules by which we and the universe co-create reality together. Quantum field theory does not reduce reality to randomness. It reveals a deeper logic, a dance of probability, energy, and interaction, where consciousness plays an essential role. The participatory universe isn't a poetic metaphor. It's a blueprint for how reality really works. In the next part, we'll explore what that blueprint means for the nature of consciousness itself. Specifically, we'll look at its non-local aspects, how consciousness might transcend space and time, and how modern physics supports the idea that awareness is not bound to a specific place or moment. The implications are even more staggering, and they bring us closer to a complete model of consciousness in a quantum universe. In classical science, consciousness has been treated as a product of local phenomena, a result of neural activity confined to the brain, triggered by sensory input and structured by biochemical reactions. But the deeper we explore through the lens of quantum field theory, the more that notion begins to break apart. Reality, as described by QFT, does not respect the limitations of locality in the traditional sense. Neither, it seems, does consciousness. To understand the idea of non-locality, let's first revisit a key principle of quantum mechanics that carries into QFT: entanglement. Two quantum systems, once linked, remain correlated regardless of the distance separating them. Their states cannot be described independently. Measuring one instantly defines the other. This is not conjecture, it's been verified experimentally countless times. Entanglement does not decay with distance. It's not slowed by time. It bypasses space-time altogether. In quantum field theory, this becomes even more significant. Entanglement is not a property of isolated particles. It is a field-level phenomenon. When two systems become entangled, their fields become coordinated in a way that extends beyond space and time. This gives us the foundation to seriously consider whether consciousness might also operate non-locally, distributed across space, capable of interaction that defies linear causality. Now let's consider what a consciousness field might look like if such a thing exists. If consciousness emerges not solely from electrochemical processes, but as an expression of a field similar to those described in QFT, it would not be bound to a particular region of space. It would exist wherever the field has amplitude, which could be across vast scales. It would not require proximity to exert influence or receive information. Here's where this becomes more than just theoretical. Numerous experiments over the past few decades have hinted at consciousness-related effects that cannot be explained by classical physics. In some studies, individuals have been able to influence random number generators at statistically significant levels from thousands of miles away. Others have shown changes in photon behavior based on focused intention. While not universally accepted, these experiments consistently reveal correlations between conscious focus and physical outcomes that exceed chance. The implications become even more powerful when examined through QFT. In this framework, influence does not need to be transmitted through space like a wave or signal. Instead, it arises from the structure of the field itself. If consciousness is field-based, then coherent mental states might alter quantum probability distributions directly, without traveling through space, but by influencing the probability field that governs the manifestation of events. Let's go further. The quantum hologram theory offers a conceptual bridge here. It proposes that the universe stores information holographically, not in particles but in patterns of interference within fields. This means every point in space contains, in principle, the whole pattern of the universe. And if consciousness is embedded in this quantum hologram, then it is not localized, it's everywhere. Your mind, your awareness, would not be confined to the physical boundaries of your brain, but distributed in the same way information is distributed in a hologram. This aligns with results from entangled systems, but it also explains something deeper: the experience of intuition, sudden insight, telepathic phenomena reported across cultures. While often dismissed as pseudoscience, these experiences gain a new kind of legitimacy if they are manifestations of interaction within a non-local consciousness field, an interaction that QFT is, at least theoretically, capable of describing. What if each conscious being is not a separate unit, but a unique expression of a larger field of awareness? What if thoughts, memories, and intentions exist not just in the brain, but as patterns impressed upon a universal field of mind? Then any node in that field, any person, any mind, might be able to interact with or access the broader matrix of consciousness. Communication would not require speech or signal. It would require resonance, alignment of field patterns. This could explain phenomena like collective consciousness, why groups sometimes arrive at insights simultaneously, why ideas seem to spread without direct contact, why inspiration can erupt across the world in parallel, with no material connection between the sources. If consciousness is non-local, then interaction across distance is not transmission, it's synchronization. This isn't magic. This is quantum logic applied to consciousness. It also suggests a powerful reinterpretation of time. In QFT, time is not a fixed background. It's relational. The structure of space-time is shaped by energy, and the fields themselves evolve through interaction. If consciousness participates in these interactions, then awareness may not be confined to the present moment in the strict sense. Past and future could become accessible, not as events to remember or predict, but as configurations within the field that can be sampled or sensed. This leads us to consider experiments in remote viewing and precognition. In such tests, individuals report accurate information about distant or future events without normal sensory input. While skeptics reject these results due to lack of classical mechanisms, QFT provides a potential framework. If the consciousness field is non-local, and if it can interact with other fields beyond present space-time, then such phenomena are not impossible, they are expected. The question then shifts from, is it real? To, how coherent is the signal? Because like all quantum fields, consciousness would be sensitive to noise, interference, and decoherence. Most of the time, mental states are turbulent, filled with distractions and randomness. But when coherent, focused, meditative, or emotionally charged, consciousness may achieve sufficient resonance to interact meaningfully across time and space. Here we find a model not only for intuitive phenomena but also for manifestation. If your thoughts are not private signals bouncing around your skull, but expressions of field states interacting with the sea of quantum potential, then intention becomes a creative act, not through effort or willpower, but through field alignment. You're not sending a request to the universe. You're shaping the probability structure that determines which version of reality becomes actualized. And this has been tested in experimental form. In studies on the observer effect at a distance, people have influenced quantum systems remotely, reducing entropy in random events, increasing coherence in lasers, or shifting outcomes in binary systems. The effects are subtle but statistically consistent. Traditional physics can't account for them. But if a non-local consciousness field interacts with quantum potential, then these effects are expected side effects of field participation. Here's the most astonishing implication. Consciousness may be the most fundamental organizing principle in the universe. Not an epiphenomenon, not a secondary effect, but a primary field, non-local by nature, existing prior to space and time, and shaping them through interaction. This inverts the scientific worldview. Instead of starting with matter and ending with mind, it begins with consciousness and derives form from it. Quantum field theory, with its inherently relational, probabilistic, and non-local features, supports this model far better than classical mechanics ever could. Now, if this is true, if your awareness is not inside your brain but spread across the field, then your personal identity is both smaller and larger than you've ever been told. Smaller because the ego is just a temporary pattern of focus within the field. But larger because the field you participate in may be as vast as the cosmos. This reframes not only science but meaning itself. If your mind can influence reality at a distance, if your intentions resonate with the field of potential, then you are not a passive experiencer of a fixed world. You are a participant in the continuous generation of reality. And this participation is not confined to what you touch, see, or hear. It extends across space and time through an invisible geometry of awareness. Quantum field theory, then, is not just a tool for predicting particles. It is a language capable of describing the hidden architecture of consciousness itself, distributed, entangled, creative, and profoundly active. In the next part, we'll take these insights and explore their direct, personal application. We'll move from theory to transformation, examining how you can harness your consciousness as a dynamic force of creation. We'll look at techniques rooted in quantum coherence, conscious intention, and field alignment. You'll learn how to deliberately participate in the shaping of your personal reality, not through belief, but through the deep, structured science of consciousness interaction. And most of all, we'll explore what it means to live not in reaction to reality, but as a conscious generator of it. If consciousness shapes reality through its interaction with quantum fields, then the question is no longer whether you can influence the world around you. The question becomes how precisely you're doing it right now, and whether you can refine that influence with deliberate awareness. Quantum field theory reveals a structure of existence that is not fixed, not rigid, but fluid and responsive to interaction. Fields are not material entities in the conventional sense. They are dynamic expressions of energy and potential. They manifest outcomes based on conditions, probabilities, and perturbations. And if your consciousness is operating as a coherent field within this system, then every thought, every emotional vibration, and every moment of focused awareness is part of the ongoing equation that produces your reality. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal extension of quantum logic. A field, by its nature, is not passive, participates, and coherent fields, those that operate in organized, resonant patterns, have disproportionately strong effects on the surrounding environment. Your mind, when functioning in such a coherent state, may be able to influence probability amplitudes in neighboring fields. This is not about changing the laws of physics. It's about aligning with the structure that makes those laws flexible at the level of potential. So what does this mean for practical use? The first step is understanding coherence. In quantum systems, coherence refers to the synchronization of wave functions, a state in which the phases of oscillation are aligned. This produces constructive interference, amplifying the effect of each contributing wave. When decoherence occurs, the system falls into disorder. Signals cancel each other out. Noise overtakes structure. Your thoughts operate the same way. Random, contradictory, scattered thoughts, those that flip from one focus to another without depth or intention, create interference patterns that weaken their influence. But when thought is coherent, sustained, emotionally aligned, and focused on a singular outcome, it creates a kind of quantum amplification. In this state, your consciousness may begin to shape the probabilities of outcomes at a field level. This is the foundation of what many have described as manifestation, but with a precision far beyond wishful thinking. It is not about positive affirmations repeated mindlessly. It is about maintaining a sustained frequency of thought that resonates with a desired configuration of the quantum field. The more coherent the mental state, the stronger its organizing power becomes. Coherence, however, is not merely a mental effort. It includes emotional alignment. Emotions in this framework are not just reactions. They are indicators of resonance or dissonance between your current thought pattern and the configuration of reality you're attempting to create. Joy, clarity, peace. These are signs of resonance. Doubt, fear, and internal conflict signal incoherence. This explains why so many attempts to consciously create change fail. The conscious desire and the subconscious emotional state are in contradiction. On the surface, one thinks, I want this. But the emotional field is saturated with beliefs of unworthiness, fear of failure, or uncertainty. The resulting field pattern is disharmonious, and its effect is minimal. To deliberately influence reality, therefore, requires alignment, not just intention but emotional coherence. This is where techniques come into play. These methods are not spiritual gimmicks or placebo rituals. They are tools for refining and stabilizing your interaction with the quantum field. The first is mental entrainment through focused visualization. Visualization is not simply imagining an outcome. It is constructing a field pattern with enough detail and emotional depth that your mind begins to align with it fully. The key is not to see a desired result from a distance, but to enter it, to feel it as present, to embody the frequency of the outcome as if it were already embedded in your current field. This practice alters your internal field configuration. It reorganizes neural networks, shifts emotional states, and, if consciousness is truly field-based, begins to interact with surrounding probabilities to favor the matching outcome. The field seeks consistency. When your inner state is stable, coherent, and repeated consistently, external manifestations begin to reflect it. The second technique is emotional coherence through heart-brain synchronization. This method is based on physiological entrainment. When the heart rate variability aligns with brainwave rhythms in a stable, coherent pattern, the electromagnetic field produced by the body becomes more ordered. Research has shown that this state improves cognitive function, intuition, and overall mental clarity. But in the quantum framework, something more profound is happening. The coherence of the emotional field enhances the resonance of the consciousness field itself. When thoughts and emotions align, the quantum signature becomes stronger. It becomes an attractor in the field, a region of increased probability density. Reality bends subtly but powerfully toward these attractors. Next is focused intention through conscious language. The words you use to describe reality are not arbitrary. They are the interface between awareness and structure. Words carry vibration, yes, but more importantly, they crystallize thought patterns into repeatable formats. They act as commands, coding reality with meaning, emphasis, and structure. When you speak with clarity, conviction, and emotional alignment, your words create ripples in the quantum field. These ripples affect not just other people but the informational substrate of reality itself. Another powerful tool is silence. In many quantum systems, observation collapses probability. But in the silence of non-judgment, non-reaction, and non-attachment, the field remains in potential. It holds the space for improbable outcomes to emerge. When you stop defining a situation by your previous expectations, when you stop reacting and allow the unknown, you suspend the collapse of the field. This gives birth to new potential. This approach is not passive. It is a mastery of field interaction. Silence is not the absence of action. It is the presence of unconditioned potential. Let's also consider the importance of ritualized repetition. Repetition trains coherence. The brain operates through patterns, and repeated thoughts create stable configurations of electrical and magnetic activity. In quantum field terms, this means consistent attention forms standing waves, persistent field states that do not decay easily. Over time, these become dominant attractors in your field of consciousness, pulling matching configurations into physical reality. You are always influencing the field. The only question is, are you doing so with randomness or with precision? And this leads us to perhaps the most essential shift: identity reconfiguration. If you view yourself as a fixed, isolated entity subject to external conditions, your field remains contracted. It operates from a position of lack, defensiveness, and reactivity. But when you recognize your identity as fluid, field-based, and participatory in reality creation, the geometry of your mind shifts. You stop reacting to the world and begin influencing it from within. Your self-image becomes a field template. The universe responds not to your desires alone, but to the field signature of who you believe yourself to be. Change that template consistently, coherently, and the field responds, not instantly, not magically, but through quantum probabilities reshaped by coherent presence. This isn't about becoming a superhuman. It's about reclaiming your natural function as a participant in the universal field. Quantum field theory already accepts that energy, particles, and form arise from fluctuations in invisible fields. If consciousness is part of that infrastructure, then your role is no longer minor. You are not just a bystander. You are a contributor to the equation of reality. And this has implications beyond the personal. When groups of individuals achieve field coherence, shared vision, emotional resonance, and unified intention, their influence may compound exponentially. This could explain the power of collective rituals, synchronized meditation, or mass intention experiments. Fields don't just add, they resonate, amplify, and create emergent structures. What kind of world could we shape if our consciousness fields were aligned not just individually but collectively? This brings us to the responsibility embedded in power. Understanding that your awareness participates in the unfolding of reality carries a weight. Every moment of attention becomes creative. Every belief becomes a mold. Every emotional pattern becomes a vector of influence. You are not just living in the world. You are helping write it. This is not philosophy. This is physics, just extended beyond the material. Quantum field theory opens the gateway to a radical transformation in how we live, think, and participate in the cosmos. No longer confined to brains or bodies, consciousness is seen as a distributed, coherent, field-based presence capable of shaping the probabilities of reality itself. The question, then, is simple: will you shape your reality unconsciously as a byproduct of noise and conditioning? Or will you become deliberate, focused, and coherent, an active participant in the field of all possibility? The tools are now clear. The science supports the shift, and the field is listening. Once you understand that consciousness is not merely a passive observer but an active participant in reality, there's no turning back. The implications reach into every corner of how you think, choose, and behave. Quantum field theory, once confined to academic discussions of subatomic behavior, now presents a mirror, one that reflects your own role in the ever-unfolding universe. This is not poetic idealism. It is a reinterpretation of consciousness through the lens of physical law, revealing your place in an interconnected, fluid, and participatory cosmos. When you realize that every mental focus carries momentum, that each emotional signature imprints itself upon the lattice of potential, the gravity of your thoughts becomes unmistakable. The field is not abstract. It is responsive. It carries echoes of your patterns, your fears, your clarity, and your intention. It is shaped by participation, and your presence, whether grounded in coherence or chaos, is a signal it integrates. This is the responsibility of creation. We are not merely here to react to the conditions around us. We are embedded within them. We co-shape the visible through the invisible, the measurable through the immeasurable. Quantum field theory shows that physical events arise from fluctuations in unseen fields, fields that are inherently non-local, relational, and interactive. Consciousness, if it is indeed a participant in this structure, cannot be reduced to a byproduct. It becomes a force, and forces carry weight. They carry consequence. This is where ethics meet physics. If your consciousness contributes to the outcome of reality, then your inner world is no longer private. Your thoughts ripple. Your judgments radiate. Your hope, cynicism, and clarity feed into the collective equation. That means responsibility is not simply moral, it is structural. You affect what is, not just in your personal experience, but potentially within the shared framework of reality. This challenges long-held assumptions about personal identity and freedom. Traditionally, we are taught to draw hard lines between ourselves and the world, between thought and consequence, between the mental and the physical. But quantum field theory erases these boundaries. Fields penetrate and overlap. Influence is not restricted to location. The act of measurement, of observation, of attention reshapes what is possible. And if your consciousness functions as a coherent, information-rich field, its effects may extend far beyond the personal domain. This is why alignment becomes essential, not just for achieving individual goals, but for participating ethically in reality itself. Every thought sustained in coherence creates an imprint. Every emotionally charged belief becomes a pattern embedded in the informational fabric. If those thoughts are centered on fear, division, or scarcity, the field begins to reflect those constraints. Not as punishment, but as structure. The field is not biased, it is reactive. It conforms to pattern, and the dominant patterns of mind influence the available paths of manifestation. This applies not only to individuals, but to groups. Collective consciousness, when patterned by shared fear, anger, or disconnection creates resonance. Just like particles vibrating in phase can amplify a wave, shared belief amplifies influence. Societal structures are not accidents. They are echoes of mental fields, normalized into institutions, behaviors, and expectations. Change, therefore, cannot begin from the outside. It must originate from a restructuring of the underlying fields, the consciousness fields that shape our shared experience. And the first step toward restructuring those fields is ownership. Not blame, not guilt, but clear acknowledgement that your thoughts and feelings are not isolated. They are contributions. When you wake up with a belief that the world is hostile, that people are untrustworthy, that scarcity defines life, you project that into the field. It becomes part of the equation. The more people who share and emotionally reinforce such beliefs, the stronger the probability of external validation becomes. This is how self-fulfilling systems emerge. Not because the universe punishes, but because the field coheres around the dominant inputs. So the task becomes not just personal development but field hygiene, an ongoing practice of monitoring what you're contributing to the larger reality equation. Are you reinforcing limitation? Are you feeding division through assumption? Or are you sustaining coherence through intentional awareness? The power of thought lies not just in desire, but in frequency. Thought that repeats with emotional coherence acts like a tuning fork. It organizes surrounding potentials into structure. That structure becomes experience. And over time, repeated experiences become reality. But power without awareness leads to chaos. It leads to contradiction. An internal field pushing for clarity, while the external manifestation remains tangled in incoherent patterns. That is the state many find themselves in. Wanting peace while focusing on conflict. Craving abundance while expecting loss. Longing for connection while embodying separation. And the field, true to form, reflects the dominant signal. This is why mastery begins in subtlety. Not by controlling everything outside, but by refining the internal broadcast. Quantum field theory supports this emphasis. The smallest perturbations can have cascading effects in sensitive systems. In quantum mechanics, the butterfly effect is not a poetic exaggeration. It is an accurate description of how potential reorganizes around change. The moment you introduce a new frequency of belief, emotion, or clarity, you influence probability density. But there is a difference between chaotic change and structured influence. Structured influence comes from coherence, thought, emotion, and identity aligned in consistent frequency. It is the equivalent of creating a standing wave in the informational field, a persistent attractor that stabilizes your desired outcomes across time. This is not manipulation. It is participation at the highest level of awareness. It is using the mind not just to wish but to configure, not just to react but to design. And yet, there is an even deeper implication. Your consciousness is not separate from others. If reality is field-based and fields interpenetrate, then individuality is not isolation. It is a unique waveform in a shared medium. You are not sealed within a mental bubble. Your thoughts and emotions, particularly when charged with intensity or sustained over time, enter the collective resonance. They influence the overall tone of the field. This is not spiritual romanticism. It is quantum logic. Non-locality means influence is not confined to proximity. Coherence transmits. And so, your transformation ripples. It affects others not necessarily through visible interaction, but through field entanglement. This reframes your journey entirely. Healing is no longer a solitary pursuit. Clarity, when sustained, becomes a beacon. Peace, when embodied, becomes stabilizing. You affect not only your life but the collective matrix of potential that all beings move within. So the responsibility is not just for your outcomes. It is for the tone you contribute to the universal field. Each moment you are transmitting. Each moment you are receiving. Each moment the field adjusts. There is no escape from participation. But there is choice in how you participate. You can create noise or music. You can amplify fear or harmony. You can exist as a reactive echo of collective programming or as a coherent, self-aware source of intentional frequency. This is the choice now available, made visible not by philosophy or spirituality alone, but by physics. Quantum field theory, when examined honestly and deeply, reveals a truth that ancient traditions have long intuited. Reality is not built from things, but from relationships. Not from objects, but from interactions. And the most subtle of all interactions may be the silent, invisible patterns of thought and awareness that ripple through the field. You are not separate from that field. You are it in a unique configuration. Your role is not incidental. It is essential. So as this understanding settles in, let it replace old assumptions. Let it remove the illusion that change must begin out there. Let it dissolve the belief that you are at the mercy of events. You are not. You are part of the structure that determines which events become real. That's not a metaphor. That's quantum reality. Creation is not something you do once in a while when you set goals. It's something you do with every sustained thought, every repeated emotion, every identity you inhabit without question. And now, with the tools revealed, the evidence laid out, and the structure made visible, the next move is yours. Not in theory, in frequency, not in hope, in resonance, not someday, now.